So now we've come to a part in David's life when the most unexpected thing was going to happen to him. And David, let's recap, he's on the run. You might wonder, whenever people think about David, to think of David as a shepherd boy, the David who became an instant hero by killing the giant Goliath. That's true. But because of David killing Goliath, the king Saul became so jealous of David, he sought for his life and wanted to kill him. He was so jealous because everyone loved David, and David became the instant hero. But now David has been spending weeks, months and years on the run from Saul. In fact, it's so bad, he's actually left Israel and he's come into the Philistine territory, the enemy country. And because of that, the king Saul withdraws and stops pursuing after David. But David settles down in the enemy country. He's changed his mind. He's been so afraid of Saul, he's almost give up, and he's lost direction, and now he's living here. And he lived here for a year and 4 months. He even fought battles for the enemy king against other enemies and beat them. And he won the respect of the king of the Philistine country. And now David asks for land. And the king respects David, and he's proven himself, and he gives him Ziklag. And here David builds homes, houses, farms, and all sorts. It becomes his place for his people. And David's got 600 men. They've now got wives and children and families, and they've got lots of money and lots of animals. They're making money, and they've got lots of things. But a battle is broken out, and the battle this time is between Israel, David's country, and the Philistines. Who's David going to fight for? The Philistines against his own people? Or is he going to go back to Israel and fight for the king who doesn't like him or doesn't want him? David is between a rock and a hard place. But he goes to the king of Ziklag, or the king and the Philistine king, and says, I'll fight for you. Me and my men will fight for you because Saul doesn't want us, so we'll fight for you, and we live in this country. And David said he would fight against his own people, Israel. The king's men said, we don't trust David, we can't trust him. David now had settled down here for maybe a couple of years or longer, and he now had family, he had children, as did his men, big families. And the king says, David, I'm sorry, but our men don't trust you. I might trust you, but the men don't, because they're afraid you will turn against him in the heat of the battle. And that was only natural. So he said, David, I'm sorry, we will go and fight against your people, but you can't come with us, you must stay here. So there's nothing David could do, so he made his way back to Ziklag. But you see, whenever he made his way back, he couldn't believe his eyes. They saw smoke in the distance, and they said, that looks like our village. And they ran as quickly as they could, and when they came, their village had been destroyed, everything was burnt, and there wasn't a person left. Their children and their wives were taken from them. And their animals were taken, their money was taken, their food was taken. Everything was stolen, and their village was burnt. And David was angry. But not only was David angry, David's men were angry. And David said, our king has turned against us. The Philistine king doesn't want us. And now because of you, our wives and our children have been taken and possibly killed. And his people were going to turn against David, and we're going to stone him to death. And now there was nobody but David. Nobody wanted David. King Saul didn't want him. His own brothers didn't want him. His king didn't want him. His country didn't want him. Now the enemy king didn't want him. And the enemy king's soldiers didn't trust him. And now his very own loyal soldiers talked about stoning him to death. So now David was a single man who stood alone with not a friend in the world. But God. That's when David got down on his knees and pleaded to God for mercy. And he prayed, and he said to his men, give me one chance, and I'll prove, I will find who took our wives, who took our children, and I will kill them. And they started following the tracks where the enemies would have went with their horses, and they came across an Egyptian man who was lying by the wayside. And David said with his knife, we're going to kill you. Tell us everything you know, because he knew he belonged to one of the enemy people. And you read all this in the Bible. How the Amalekites came and attacked Ziklag, David, and David was after the Amalekites. He recognized him as one of them. And he said, tell us everything. And they said, yes, we stole all your money, we stole your animals, but we didn't kill your children or your wives. We took them with us, and we burnt Ziklag. And I'll tell you exactly where they're going. And the man told them where they were going, and David never killed them. And they followed them all the way, and it was evening time. And David got off his horse with a spear and his soldiers, and he waited till dark, and all the enemy, the Amalekites, were all dancing. They were rejoicing. They were happy because they'd burnt Ziklag, they'd stole David's wife and children, and they thought he knew nothing about it and he'll never find this. Do you see when it got dark? David's men attacked and killed every one of them. The Bible says 400 young men escaped on camel, but every other one of them died on the spot, and not one of their children or their wives were harmed. They recovered their children, recovered their wives, recovered their money, and as a result, the men then respected and gave loyal back to David for doing that. But that was an example of what David done. David was a man of God. God was leading him, and he was fighting the battles because God was giving him the strength and training him to be the man he wanted him to be. But David wasn't just a happy king or a nice shepherd. David lived most of his life on the run, running from the king, from people who actually hated him and wanted him dead. Why? Because they were jealous. Jealousy is a terrible thing, and it still happens today. It still happens today.